That's disgusting.
The games I just showed you all have one important thing in common. And I don't mean that they are all survival horror games, or third person, or feature a lot of gore and enemies, or highly acclaimed by both fans and critics. No, of course I mean that they were all directed by Shinji Mikami. And if you know him, you probably know why he is such an important person for the whole survival horror genre, considering that it literally wouldn't exist today without him. And if you didn't know him, then you just heard right. Without Shinji Mikami, survival horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dead Space and so much more wouldn't exist today, or at least not like they are. But why is that? What makes this dude so influential to the horror gaming world? Mikami was born in 1965 in Japan. After dreaming of becoming a Formula 1 driver, he became interested in horror films like The Evil Dead as a teenager. After graduating from the University, the most esteemed private university of Kyoto, he joined Capcom in 1990. After a few years of working as a designer and planner for games like Disney's Aladdin and Goof Troop, he began working as a director on a horror game for the first PlayStation set in a haunted mansion, probably plagued by evil residents. Originally planned as a remake of Capcom's earlier Sweet Home, a 1989 release game about a haunted mansion, it transformed to being something slightly different. Finally released in 1996 for the first PlayStation, it featured some, for the time, groundbreaking graphics with pre-rendered 2D backgrounds, but also fully 3D modeled characters, objects and enemies. That resulted in great and realistic looking graphics with a level of detail that wasn't possible before on the previous consoles. Apart from that, the goals changed to George A. Romeo inspired zombies, but the mansion, although technically not really haunted anymore, remained. Obviously I'm talking about Biohazard, or Resident Evil outside of Japan, and obviously it was a huge success, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it right now. It was actually so huge and successful that the subgenre survival horror, that was basically invented by Capcom to market this game, was made popular with just this one game. And plenty of both big and small developers tried to recreate the success with their own copies, like Konami with Silent Hill, Sega with Deep Fear, and a lot of smaller publishers with their own survival horror games. And all of them took a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil and therefore Mikami's work. The pre-rendered 2D backgrounds with fixed camera angles were copied a lot, and are even popular today in indie games. The tank controls were present in pretty much every horror game, no matter the perspective, as well as the emphasis on limited resources like healing items and ammunition, limited and into-the-world integrated save stations, puzzles, backtracking, and obviously the attempt at horror and gore. Apart from just a very few games like the other Resident Evil games, Dino Crisis and Silent Hill, the first Resident Evil remained a much better game though. The controls are a lot better than the most games from the time, even though they may be clunky for today's players that aren't used to them, because trust me, other games were worse. The layout and design of the mansion and other areas was basically unmatched and is still fun today, and the whole game in general is just a lot more enjoyable than what followed from other companies. And that's also the reason why Resident Evil was so successful and influential. It basically gave the perfect guideline on how a survival horror game has to look and play like, and was until at least Resident Evil 2 arguably the undisputed best at it. So just because of the first Resident Evil, Mikami is arguably one of the most important people for the survival horror genre already, because he truly made it popular with his groundbreaking ideas on Resident Evil, and without him it would have looked very different for sure. But because this isn't crazy enough already, it was just the first time he transformed the whole genre. But that's not the only crazy thing. According to YouTube, most of you are not subscribed even though you watch my videos. So if you are enjoying this right now, and I mean the rest of the video and not this desperate attempt, please consider doing so to support me. Thanks a lot. After directing some other Capcom games in the following years, like Dino Crisis and the Resident Evil 1 remake, and being the producer for even more, like basically all Resident Evil sequels, Dino Crisis 2 and 3, and Devil May Cry, we arrive in 2005 and the release of Resident Evil 4. But let's go back a few years again. Resident Evil 4's development started in 1999, but instead of Mikami, Hideki Kamiya was assigned to direct the game. Unfortunately, the game strayed away too much from the concept of Resident Evil during development, so it was reworked into a completely new game, later released as Devil May Cry, which arguably worked out very well for them. After that, 2 other builds of Resident Evil 4 were developed during the following years. One concept featuring a fog enemy and a castle that was the base for the later released Haunting Ground, and the more known Resident Evil 3.5 or Hookman build, which was shown at the E3 2003 but was ultimately scrapped as well. After that, our man Mikami finally took over again to direct and rework what was already there to the final release of
Resident Evil 4.
And not only did it save Resident Evil from becoming irrelevant, because sales were getting worse with the same formula over and over again. I mean, there was also the problem of Mikami making a deal with Nintendo to release the mainline Resident Evil games exclusively on the GameCube, which might have not been the smartest. But apart from that, it also redefined the whole third-person shooter genre as well. Instead of following the survival horror concept of the previous games, Mikami decided to switch over to an action horror approach. So puzzles are pretty much gone now, apart from very few very easy ones. Backtracking is completely gone and the whole game has the player basically running in a straight line. The emphasis on resource management is turned down a lot, with the introduction of enemies that drop resources like money, ammunition and healing items, and there's a lot more action and enemies than previously. I mean, they even included a new stat in the result screen showing you how many enemies you killed and how accurate you were. And although the kill count was already present in the Resident Evil remake, it kinda feels a lot more rewarding here to kill even more. Apart from that, it introduced quicktime events to the broad masses and switched from the fixed camera angles to an over-the-shoulder third-person view. And from that point onwards, both of these changes were present in pretty much every single action game and heavily influenced the gaming space of the 7th console generation. Feel free to comment one single action game from that generation without either QTEs or an over-the-shoulder camera. I will wait. It has literally become the standard to use both of these and they are used everywhere. No matter if it's other horror games like Dead Space or Silent Hill, shooters like Gears of War, hack and slash games like God of War, action adventures like The Last of Us and Uncharted, or even every single game made by Rockstar. And even though most of them developed the ideas further, for example with smoother controls, the possibilities to use covers and free camera movement, Resident Evil 4 and Mikami still made it big, and without him deciding to change the game like he did, it's a safe bet that the whole action game genre will look very different today. Apart from that, Resident Evil will probably not exist anymore today either, so I'm very happy after all. Well, and then after Capcom released the game for the PS2 in late 2005, because keeping it on just the GameCube was still pretty stupid and hurt the game's sales, Mikami left the company because he promised that it would be an exclusive for the GameCube and that he would quit if it was ever released somewhere else. And apparently he doesn't joke around if he says such things. So he did exactly that. After that he obviously continued to make games, but nothing was ever so influential like Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4 again. But especially the Evil Within games that are produced and directed by him as well are for sure very interesting for horror fans, and especially the gameplay is still clearly inspired by Resident Evil 4. Although I'm not very sure if you can really call that inspired, considering he directed both games. So Shinji Mikami is arguably largely responsible for the boom of the survival horror genre in the first place, for the change to a more action-oriented approach in the 2000s, and the use of the over-the-shoulder camera in like every single game since Resident Evil 4. I think all this really puts into perspective why this dude was so influential for the whole gaming space to this day, because it would literally not be the same without him. Additionally, this channel and the channel of other survival horror content creators probably wouldn't exist either, so you can thank him if you enjoy this kind of stuff. But I'm also going to thank you for watching. Please tell me in the comments what you think of this Mikami dude, and please consider subscribing, liking and sharing the video if you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot and see you next time.